Tonight, in early America, black slaves and white indentured servants are equally exploited.
Their work is what was valuable, not their person.
Then laws begin to distinguish between black and white.
1640 is sort of the turning point where Africans are going to be treated differently.
And slavery spreads across all the colonies.
People are being considered property.
The downward spiral begins.
An entire economy based on exploitation of Africans is in place within a generation.
Before 1800, more people came to America from Africa than from anywhere else, and most of them came in chains. Their toil helped make the United States the richest nation on earth.
Slavery was no sideshow in American history. It was the main event.
America was a slave-owning country longer than it has been a free one, and the legacy of slavery haunts us still.
We've made certain progress in race relations, but we'll never get further until we look more closely at slavery.
This is a story of resistance and the struggle to maintain human dignity. It is a story of the demand for freedom told through the lives of enslaved people. And it's the story of the founding fathers you never knew. They were from Africa and Europe. Some were enslaved, some were indentured servants. All of them were poor and exploited. Their status as workers was confusing and complex. Their lives were controlled by the Dutch West India Company. Day after day, they struggled to survive the harsh world of Dutch New Amsterdam in the 1620s. Evening after evening, they gathered in taverns.
Taverns were places where you gathered to talk about your problems. And slaves would complain about their masters, and indentured servants would complain about their masters. So they had a lot of interracial bonding in these taverns.
You have people who indenture themselves. They promise their labor to a wealthy person for 7 years in order to pay off the price of coming to the New World.
The Dutch West India Company had established a fur trading post in 1624 on a hilly island called Manahattis. The area would become New York City. Less than 200 people lived in the settlement. Most were men from Northern Europe who worked for the company. To make larger profits, the Dutch West India Company wanted free labor. Free Africans had come to the New World with European explorers in the 1530s. English settlers in Jamestown, Virginia purchased 20 Africans from Dutch traders in 1619. 5 years later, the first enslaved Africans arrived in Dutch New Amsterdam. Their bondage began approximately 200 years of slavery in what would become America's northern states.
The first 11 enslaved people, all male, who came to New Amsterdam, were brought by the Dutch West India Company. They were owned by the company, not by individuals. So They're company slaves, and they're brought by the company for the purpose of building the colony.
It was quite common for the Dutch and for the English to raid the wealthier Spanish and the Portuguese shipping to get people and to get property. So these people really are, in a sense, prisoners of war.
These people come out of a larger Atlantic world in the 14th and 15th century as Africa, Europe, and the Americas meet for the first time. We call them Atlantic Creoles.
Atlantic Creoles had cultural roots in both Africa and Europe. Some were the offspring of European men and African women. Some traveled the seas with Europeans. Some may have been literate. Many spoke multiple languages.
The names of the first 11 indicate some of that mixture. The names Simon Congo, or Anthony Portuguese, or John d'Angola. These names are European names, Simon, Anthony, John. They're Christian names. And then the last names, Portuguese, indicating a connection with Portugal, perhaps with a Portuguese explorer, or Congo, indicating this is a Christian African who came from the Congo.
The enslaved did not know if or when freedom would come. In the settlements of Virginia, Massachusetts, and New Amsterdam, slavery was undefined. There were no laws, no rules, no regulations.
It was a difficult, hard life. They are expected to work regardless of the weather, regardless of the temperature, because their work is what was valuable, not their person.
Work began at sunrise. The company forced the first 11 to clear land, construct roads, and unload ships. They were both manual and skilled workers. Their labor helped build the Dutch New Amsterdam economy.
The first 11 slaves were there really to provide the infrastructure. So they were really the backbone of this early colony and really were integral to the survival of Europeans.
Because the Dutch did fear racial mixture, they were not interested in marriages between Creoles and Dutch women or Belgian women. Therefore, by the late 1620s, they brought in Creole or African women into the colony.
The women are ostensibly brought, as the company says, for the comfort of our Negro men. They will need to perform at least 2 jobs, which is to be sexual partners for the men, but to be hard workers as well. The men are going to be very important then in helping these women navigate, since the men have been there for slightly longer than the women and understand the terrain.
Slaves in New Amsterdam during this time have rights that we think of as unusual for enslaved people, those wages. Europeans are dependent on enslaved people, and so they need to, in a sense, appease them.
Because slavery had no legal structure, the Atlantic Creoles were able to negotiate for greater autonomy. In 1635, several of them petitioned the Dutch West India Company for wages they believed the company owed them. Anthony Portuguese sued a white merchant in 1638. A year later, Pedro Negreto and Manuel de Rus successfully sued Europeans for wages due. Court records indicate that Atlantic Creoles made the system work for them when they could.
In some African slavery, there is a greater sense of the rights of the enslaved people. There's a greater sense of obligation on the part of the community. And I think that these enslaved people bring that idea of slavery with them.
In 1641, Anthony Van Angola, one of the first 11, married Lucy de Angola. It was the first recorded marriage between black people in Dutch New Amsterdam.
The enslaved understand legitimating a marriage is a way to claim ground. They are sophisticated interpreters of the landscape.
In Europeans' religious beliefs, you were not supposed to enslave another Christian, and African people knew this and attempted to convert to Christianity.